Sepsis is a life-threatening condition that happens when the body's response to infection gets out of control. There's too much of a response. So what happens is this causes widespread inflammation, and sepsis can potentially lead to organ failure. When we look at it at a cellular level, before we understand sepsis, we have to understand our immune system. So when we think about the immune system, when we get an infection, so when a pathogen enters our body, like bacteria or viruses or other things, they will invade our body and your immune system will kick into action, which is a good thing. Your white blood cells, which are also called leukocytes, are the first responders to an infection. That's why their numbers go up when you have an infection. They recognize the pathogen, like the bacteria or the virus, and they do this by recognizing receptors that detect foreign molecules. This recognition will trigger the release of signaling molecules called cytokines, and cytokines will get more immune cells to go to the site of infection. Now, in a typical scenario, this response is very well regulated. The immune cells will attack the pathogens, and once the threat is calmed down or neutralized, your immune response goes down. But in sepsis, what happens is the response just goes out of control. Your immune response becomes dysregulated and cytokines are released too much, and this leads to a cytokine storm. So what happens during a cytokine storm is there's too many cytokines, and these cause too much inflammation or widespread inflammation. This makes our blood vessels leaky, which allows immune cells to go into the tissues. This may sound beneficial, but it actually causes severe problems. The leaky vessels lead to a loss of blood volume, which in turn reduces blood pressure and impairs blood flow. Organs like our kidneys, liver, and brain start to suffer because they're not getting enough oxygen and enough nutrients. At the cellular level, the endothelial cells lining the blood vessels are also really affected. Normally, these cells control the passage of materials and also white blood cells into and out of our bloodstream. During sepsis, too much inflammation makes these endothelial cells more permeable, and this leads to leakage and swelling. And this is not a good thing because it can also affect coagulation of our blood. This can block small blood vessels and it can cause more damage to organs and tissues. So as this situation progresses, as sepsis progresses, cells will start to die, and this cell death releases even more signals that cause even more inflammation or a higher inflammatory response. Mitochondria, which are the powerhouses of our cells, become dysfunctional. They're not functional, and this leads to energy failure in our cells. Without enough energy, cells can't perform necessary functions and organs start to fail. Sepsis can also progress to something called septic shock, where our blood pressure drops to dangerously low levels and many organs can fail at the same time. At this point, the risk of death is very high, and it is important to get immediate medical intervention. Now, there's a common misconception that sepsis and blood infection is the same thing. They're similar, but not exactly the same thing. A blood infection, like a bacteria in the blood, bacteremia, occurs when bacteria enter the blood. This can happen from infections in other parts of the body, like the lungs, the urinary tract, or even like an infected wound. While bacteria in the blood can lead to sepsis, sepsis is not only limited to just having pathogens in your blood. Sepsis is our body's overwhelming and toxic response to any infection. Whether that started in the blood, lungs, skin, or other tissues, it's basically widespread inflammation. And it's not just bacteria that can cause sepsis. Viruses, fungus, parasites can also trigger this dangerous condition. For example, severe cases of COVID can lead to viral sepsis, and fungal infections in immunocompromised people can also cause fungal sepsis. This is our body's extreme and harmful response to any of these infections.